Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Homegrown Podcast. My name is Jeff Harker, your facilitator / host for today. And you will be able to find this particular podcast on our Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel as well. So we hope you find us one way or the other. And with me today are some of my colleagues from Keep Indiana Learning for our discussion today. As I said, my name is Jeff Harker, and my background is in middle school education.
I'll go next. My name is Ryan Murray. Been on the podcast before as a co-host, and excited to join the conversation. My background is largely in middle school STEM.
And I'll go next. I'm Erin McNeil. My background is in middle and high school, English language arts and with English learners.
And I'm Marty Hoofer. I taught middle school reading and writing for 12 years. And so I'm going to round out the middle school voice here. And Morgan, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, well, this is fun because I get to be the elementary voice today. So my background is in first, third, and fourth grade. So thank you, Jeff, for inviting us today. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. If I'd have known who let her in, that elementary version. Oh, no, I love it. My wife was elementary, so I love it. Our discussion today, as the title indicates, is around things I didn't learn in college, kind of teacher edition. There's a lot of books out there about things I didn't learn in college, but they're mostly around business or just life lessons. And this is specifically centered around education. And I'm going to start the conversation by talking about building relationships. And I'm not talking about student relationships, because we were told all the time in college how important it is to build relationships with your students. Get to know them, talk about yourself in the classroom, all that. What I'm thinking about are those other relationships in the building that are really important so that your day-to-day job, so to speak, is a little more pleasurable and tolerable in some cases, I guess. One of my favorite relationships was with the custodians.
Always
getting to know the custodians, where their office is, who they are, bring them cookies at Christmas. And then what I found was when I needed like an extra trash can, or I needed an extra chair, or my chair on my desk broke or something, they were always right there to help. What about the rest of you? What are some relationships that, other than student relationships, which we know are important, what are some other relationships that really helped you get through the day?
The technology people. Having someone to help you troubleshoot what you're doing in your classroom, what your students need help with on their iPads or their laptops. So having someone on speed dial that you can quickly get there.
Oh, Erin, that is a good one that I had not thought about, but mine is also from the language arts standpoint, making friends with my media specialist. That when I needed help co-teaching a lesson, or I knew when that first day of research or the first day of logging into new devices before schools were more one-to-one, I knew I could not do it by myself. So bringing her alongside as an extra adult in the room, game changer. So for a language arts teacher, I highly recommend making friends with that media specialist.
I was a math teacher, so I spent like 2 days in 30 years in the media center. But Erin, you said IT. There were so many times when I think if I didn't have the relationship I had with my IT people, I might have had to fill out a form or a ticket, right? And wait, and they might get to it. Whereas if you have a relationship with that person, they might stop by your room on their way to somewhere else.
I even had an IT coach who would come in and teach my students how to use the tools they would need for the ELA work they were going to do. And that was just a game changer for me because I also got to learn with them of, what tools we could use.
So my
You know-
person, my IT person was actually Lena, another colleague of ours. She was my IT person that I would
Fun.
call, and she would come into my classroom and teach me some things along with my students. So that's kind of how I met her and got to know her.
Cool.
The first one I thought everyone was going to say was the secretaries.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say that too.
That's a good one.
It's a good one.
I mean, they are the lifeblood of a school. They're the ones that make stuff happen. So making or setting up a good relationship with the secretaries and, and same with your students, having your students know the secretaries and the custodians and all those people, like that's huge. And, things get done when you ask the secretaries or the custodians for sure.
Especially when the copier jams,
Yes.
Yeah.
right? And you don't know how to fix it.
I will add to the relationship piece too. As a parent now, having good relationships with those people is also a huge benefit. And I'm going to shout her out because she's tremendous, but at my boys' school, Miss Bree at Smoky Row, she's the head of custodial services over there, and she looks out for our boys and will say, Gavin left his sweatshirt out on the playground again. I got it. I'll give it to you in the morning. Those kind of things. Like, she's just phenomenal. And to have an extra set of eyes on your kids when they're at school is always a good thing.
So I actually have a story about that as well. When I was growing up, the elementary school that I went to, my younger brother had a very, very hard time going to school, like to the point where he would run from the school bus when it was coming to pick him up. It was very bad, very tough for my mom. So she started to have to bring him to school to drop him off. And the only person that he would walk into the building with was the custodian.
Mm-hmm.
They had made that relationship, formed that relationship. And so they tried everything: school counselor, principal, his teacher, and he was fine once he got in there. But it was the initial drop off. They figured out, okay, the custodian will get my brother into that building.
That's awesome. What about their coaches, your students' coaches?
Oh, yeah.
I was a coach myself, and I got a lot of traction from knowing who my students' coaches were.
Yep. Yes, I use that to my advantage on the regular, knowing, okay, this kiddo plays volleyball, so I need to go track down that volleyball coach and have a conversation. And then, if nothing else, if I'm just name dropping in casual conversation with the kiddo, oh, I talked to Coach Smith yesterday. Oh, suddenly they know that I know Coach Smith, and suddenly there's a different relationship there. So I can use it to my advantage, but it's also good for the kid to know that there's a group of adults that care about me, that are looking out for me. So yeah, Jeff, I'm glad you said that, because those relationships with those coaches are valuable.
Takes a village.
Yeah.
Takes a village. Let's switch to, I don't know if it's a more serious topic or not, but one I know I'm interested in, and that's how to talk to parents. I always liked talking to the parents. I thought it was a skill that I had, and I've been told by other teachers that I teach with, Jeff, you're so good with the parents. So I feel like that's a skill that I have, but I also know it's a skill not everyone has. One thing that I always tell people is talk about the negatives. Be honest. If it's bad, tell them it's bad, but never give a negative without a solution, without a path forward or a positive step. I always call them positive steps.
Yeah.
Always give a positive step forward. Otherwise, you're just complaining about their kid.
Right.
And they already know all that. They're probably complaining right along with you.
You're absolutely right with the be honest piece, because the parents know their kids, and if you're sugarcoating it and not shooting straight, like, they're gonna know, and then you've lost your credibility right out of the gate.
Right.
So
Oh,
yeah,
that's so good. Yeah, that's
being honest, as hard as it can be sometimes, is one of the best things you can do.
Mhm.
But I will say, on the flip side, one thing, I don't think I was very good at this when I first started teaching,
none of us
until
were.
I started getting emails from teachers. And then I started to realize, hey, maybe I should treat every child like they're my own when I'm reaching out to their parents. What would I want someone to say to me as a parent? And I think just keeping that little idea of how would I feel if someone was sending this to me is a really important thing to learn as well.
Yes. And Aaron, that's goes exactly with what I was going to say. Sometimes when I would be talking to parents, and I got better at this as I started having middle school age children, when I would sometimes just talk to them and say, you know what, can I just talk to you as a fellow parent? And then like we would talk as parents, not teacher to parent. And you know what? Yeah, my kid carried around his homework in his backpack as well. No, I don't know why they don't turn it in. I wish I knew. So, just that commiserate that it is not just your kid. Your kid is not unique in this whatever situation. We're going to work on it together and figure out what works for your kid, but they're fine. They're fine. We're just going to figure it out together.
The number of times I got home to my mom freaking out about, I saw you do it. Why didn't you turn it in? It was the weekly thing for sure.
And I'll use the phrase I used 100 times, maybe 1,000 with parents. Unfortunately, that makes you normal.
Yeah.
It's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Jeff.
I know.
I found that with working with mainly younger kiddos, when I went above and beyond the basic, like newsletter sent home on Friday, we used Class Dojo sometimes so they could see how their kiddo was doing in class. When it was the text messages, the phone call after school when a kiddo that had been having a really hard time had a good day, like those things to go above and beyond what was expected as far as communication. I mean, there are some parents that I had their child in class that I'm still connected with, that I still talk to occasionally. And I think it's because I forged that relationship with them and did a lot more than just, I guess, what was expected.
Call when you don't need to.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. When, I know we're thinking parent wise, but attending my students out of school things, not only did a ton for building relationships with my students, but really built some strong relationships with parents, because the kids are out there doing their thing, right? You're usually sitting with the parents, and it's kind of a disarming situation that you're in where you have this shared interest in their child, and you can talk a little bit more casually in a way that
around.
Yeah, exactly. So I highly recommend that. And I learned that kind of later into teaching, but now whenever I talk to pre-service teachers, that's one of the things I harp on is go to your students' things.
Every time I would see parents out somewhere like that, like at the store or a restaurant or a game or something, I'd always say, I'm counting this as a parent conference. Just so you know, this counts.
I will never forget going through a McDonald's drive-through, and I stop at the first window to pay, and it was a former student, but I had their younger sibling at the time. We had a whole sibling teacher conference in the McDonald's drive-through, and I was feeling like, you know what? Let's wrap this up and let's talk more later, because, I'm kind of holding up the whole line at this point. But I will never forget that McDonald's drive-through sibling teacher conference.
And I'm glad you said that, Marty, because
Yeah.
a lot of times with English learners, that's your English language connection is an older sibling. And so being able to keep those lines open to talk to older siblings and say, hey, I really need this form signed. That's a really important thing for English learners to have those siblings available.
Yeah.
Let's move on to a topic that I think has kind of gotten a bad rap recently, and that is self-care.
Mm.
because nobody told me when I was in college that this job was hard
Mm.
and that you're going to be really tired
Yeah.
Mhm.
a lot of days.
Yeah.
And you know, you may feel like you have to come to school sick.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all done that, right? We've all done that. But when you talk to people about self-care, some tend to get, I don't know how else to describe this, but a little bit, I've never been accused of being politically correct, a little bit self-righteous.
Mm.
You know, for example, I taught with a teacher that taught for maybe 25 years, never once took a sick day
Wow.
in 25 years, which I applaud 100%. But sometimes she would look kind of down her nose at you if you took a mental health day, for example. If you felt you needed a day, but you weren't really sick, she felt like you were letting down your students somehow or something like that. And it gets me thinking about self-care and how the answer is in the word. It's self-care, right? It's how I take care of myself, not how I take care of my colleagues. They can take care of themselves. For me, it was a mental health day. I was a much better teacher if about once a month I got away for a moment. And so I used quite a few of my sick days on, you know, what we call mental health days, when I just needed a moment to myself to regroup. And then I was gangbusters when I came back, you know. But that was kind of my way of self-care, so to speak. So how did you guys kind of take care of you so you can take care of others?
I realized very quickly that how easy it would be to get burnt out. I was spending early mornings and every evening, even after school hours, doing stuff at school. So my self-care, I want to say it was probably my third year of teaching. My self-care was committing to one night during the week that I would stay late and make copies, do planning, do whatever I needed to. I still showed up early most mornings because I'm a morning person, but for me, that self-care was, okay, Wednesday night, I'm staying late to get all my copies made and get stuff ready. And then the other nights, I'm going to leave at a reasonable time after the buses, when my contract time was ended, whatever it looked like. But that was a game changer for me, with just prioritizing myself more in the afternoons and evenings than I had in those first couple of years of teaching.
And now you've got small children.
Yes. And I have so much respect for teachers that.
Wow. I mean, that's a game changer. Sorry, right there. You know, that it kind of changes the rules when you get kids at home.
Yeah. Morgan, mine goes along with that. I did not realize this early in my career. So I taught adults for a while before I taught middle school. And so I thought I understood work-life balance, and then I became a teacher and I realized, oh, no. Work-life balance as a teacher is completely different than work-life balance when you work for a Fortune 500 company. And I did not realize that quick enough. And I did start to burn myself out. And so for me, that looked like no work on Sundays, none at all. And so to make that possible, did that mean I had to work hard? Sometimes a lot of Saturday? Yes. But I knew I had that day coming. And that was where I found my balance. But it took me far too long to figure that out.
I agree. I don't think I did this well. I think I tried to do contract time. That was one thing I tried to do, and then I could get away and be home, and then try to catch up on other things I needed to do. But I do want to say Kate Roberts was our keynote speaker at Reading Summit this year, and her entire presentation was about self-care. And she said, for kids to be doing well, teachers need to be doing well. And I remember thinking, I wish I would have known that
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention the number of years, but I wish I would have known that when I started teaching. Right.
I think we need to stop calling it self-care. I feel like that word got overused through COVID, and, as we were at home doing the virtual learning thing. And maybe that's just me, but I remember hearing it all the time. And Jeff, you kind of alluded to it, that it has become somewhat stigmatized as this word that sometimes administrators throw out there at the end of a PD. They're like, "Don't forget self-care," and all the teachers moan and groan because it's like, you say that, but I'm going to go.
For all you administrators listening out there, self-care is not a candy bar in my mailbox.
Or a jeans day. Stop giving jeans days and thinking you're solving the world's problems.
Self-care. Yeah.
I do love jeans, though.
Yeah.
So Ryan, what do we call it?
Yeah, Ryan, that was going to be my question. So what do you call that? Maybe just being human? Personal healing.
I don't know. I'm just using synonyms at this point.
What about teacher well-being or?
Yeah.
Just take care of your darn self. There, we call it take care of your darn self time. And I didn't swear, Jeff. You see how I did that? I said darn.
Nice catch. Yeah, I just think though it needs to be personal, right? Yeah. If you're out there and you have gone several years without taking a sick day, kudos for you. All the applause that you want to gather is yours. Great. But everybody's care is a little bit different. Everybody's needs are a little bit different. Everybody's situations are a little bit different. And finding those different ways to heal ourselves when we need it is important. So thank you for that.
One other idea. And maybe this is already a thing and I'm just not aware of it, but it would be really incredible if districts could hire outsource a counseling service for teachers to just have access to someone to talk to that is impartial. Like, I don't want to talk to my administrator about all the problems that my wife is tired of hearing about it. Like, somebody that is just a sounding board, that is familiar with schools, that can at least kind of talk about, Timmy threw a chair at me today and that really was awful. And just like those things that we all go through, that we feel like we're experiencing by ourselves because it's within our classroom, but it is kind of a shared experience, and that gets lost when we are within those four walls. So having just an outlet that is impartial, that can just respond, that would be some real self-care right there.
So Ryan, let me ask a question about that. So a lot of employee insurance has that employee resource that is kind of like a therapist kind of thing. But I think something you said that's different than that is it needs to be an educator, because I think there's something when teachers talk, because no one understands like a fellow teacher. And that's also why my husband always said there needed to be a support group for spouses of educators. Because that's a thing.
That's very true.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Ryan. My district that I was in, part of our insurance, we had, I don't know how many it was, a certain number of hours of therapy paid for by insurance. You just had to sign up. But until recently, I know I felt it. There's kind of been a stigma around that, and that if I need a therapist, then I'm in real trouble, kind of thing. But I'm glad you said it, because I think in the last few years, especially since COVID, we're now becoming a society that's a lot more open to paying attention to mental illness, and not mental illness per se, but just that need to, as you said, just talk to somebody about it, just to get it out. And I think that's hopefully becoming more of a thing. Absolutely. Let's do one more topic today. It's been a great discussion, by the way. I've loved it. do you want to talk a little, I'll give you a choice. Do you want to talk a little bit about SPED, special education, or do you want to talk about, let's go to, I've got several I can choose from. Let's go to this thing about high expectations, because that's kind of a nebulous kind of word.
That is nebulous, Jeff.
Very.
High expectations of myself, my students. Were both.
Here's what. Let's go to that one then. What I'm talking about is I know in college, I remember hearing the professors say, you got to have high expectations.
Oh.
Children will rise to high expectations.
Right.
But no one ever said what those high expectations are, or how to implement them, or how to get students to do it, or anything. It just was that kind of catchphrase of, you got to have high expectations. You know, or if you have low expectations, students will lower themselves to it. You know, they'll match whatever expectation you have. So why not have high expectations?
I have lots of thoughts on this. But one thing I want to say is I think that has been a detriment to our students, because we think they need to start at the top when many of them may not have the skills to write a 6-page paper, because they may need work writing sentences before we get there. And we keep saying things like, but you know, the high expectations at their grade level, and right, but we have to teach all those steps before we get to that point where they can do those things.
Yeah, and I always felt like my professors were saying, well, if you just set the expectations, say what it is, then that'll be enough. But what I discovered, what I learned since college, is there's a huge trust issue. There's trust that has to be built there. Students have to trust you, and you have to trust that the students can do it.
Right. Jeff, I'm thinking about one student I had in particular, and his name was Jeremiah. And Jeremiah writing a whole paragraph was a whole coherent paragraph. That would have been a very high expectation for Jeremiah. Jeremiah stringing some sentences together could happen, but I had to learn to adjust. What does high expectations mean for Jeremiah versus Christian that he's sitting right next to? Those are different high expectations. And I would push on Christian and he would get angry, and I would keep pushing because I knew he could do more. And I just kept pushing on him. Well, my pushing on Jeremiah looked very different, but I was pushing Jeremiah to high expectations for Jeremiah. And that has to be okay, because Jeremiah and Christian started very different places. And I guarantee you today, they're in very different places. And that's what I wasn't prepared for. That, yes, I was supposed to have high expectations for all students, and I'm going to expect these beautiful paragraphs from every single kiddo sitting in my class. That would have been completely unfair for Jeremiah. That never. So when I got to start with, when I got one quality coherent sentence, there we go. Now we can work with something. So that's what I had to learn, Jeff, was yes, I had to have high expectations, but they were different for every single kiddo that sat in my classes.
Well, and you know, I'll shout out to my professors, Dr. Craig Willey and Dr. Paula McGee back at IUPUI. But you know, we talked about Vygotsky, and at the time, you know, it was like, theory stuff, zones of.
How old are you, Ryan? Vygotsky, really?
I mean, it's just now. Sorry about it. Why?
That's so 90s.
But the zones of proximal development, I mean, that's what we're talking about. Is what, you know, each student has readiness for different things. So high expectations, yes, but the one high expectation assigned to an entire class is setting up many to fail. It has to be, you know, what does the student believe they can do? Let's push farther than that. But to say my expectation for student A and B is the same, I mean, as adults, we would hate that. right? We would hate to, have an expectation of myself compared to my neighbor across the street. It's the same. Like we're different people. We have different lived experiences that don't amount to the same understanding or ability at this moment. That's not to say that I can't get there,
Right.
but in this moment, we are very different.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to be honored.
Yeah. I jotted down some notes before we logged on today, just in anticipation. And that was one of the things that we talked about building relationships with students in college. We talked about all that stuff, but that relationship piece is so important for that exact reason, to be able to set realistic expectations, high expectations, but realistic for that student. You won't be able to do that. You won't be able to manage them. You won't be able to do so many things if that relationship piece isn't there. So I think that what all of you guys said is that relationship with that student and knowing them so well is what's going to make or break that high expectation.
Rita Pearson, kids don't learn from teachers they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
Yeah. And one thing I think what I didn't learn in college is that it's just as important to understand your students as it is to understand your content, if not more important. So I think because I was a secondary education major, most of the courses I took were in English. And so there was such a big focus on content. And we talked some about relationships, but not really about how that is probably more important than the content, because you have to figure out what your kids are able to do and how to get them there.
Yeah.
In my own classroom, this high expectations ended up taking on freedom in the classroom. I became, because if I expected them to behave a certain way, I had to trust that they could actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a lot of classrooms where the teacher says, oh, I want my kids to be self-directed or autonomous, but then they make them raise their hand and ask to go blow their nose, and they don't give them any responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the rules in my classroom, was I don't really have a lot of rules.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You take care of you. Now, I don't want you to leave the classroom, because that's a school policy, not a classroom policy. But if you need to sharpen a pencil, blow your nose, throw something away, whatever, go do it. And then let's get back to business. Don't interrupt, don't talk to 20 people on your way, but giving them that freedom and that responsibility really helped build the relationships that we've all been talking about. Yeah. Because the kids got a sense that, oh, he trusts me enough to go do this on my own. He's an okay guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll add, because I think it dovetails nicely, that encouraging your students to have high expectations of you is so important. I think they want to have high expectations of their teacher, but there's some fear built into that. And so encouraging that level of expectation, like, listen, you should expect me to be able to grade and return your tests in a reasonable amount of time. And so that, putting that out into the open, then when you're 5 days past that point and your students feel that it's okay to come and say, hey, Mr. Murray, any progress on those tests? Like, that's okay. That's a healthy thing. And that has to be explicitly stated, in my opinion, or else, the structures just don't typically provide for that. So opening the conversation at the start of the year to say, like, hey, I'm going to expect your best. So it's only fair that you expect my best. And if I'm not giving that to you, that needs to be a conversation.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Ryan.
Yeah.
As we think about winding up, any other closing thoughts from anyone? Or you want to revisit anything that we've chatted about today?
I think my parting thought, it kind of piggybacks off of what Ryan just said, is that it's okay to be human in front of your students, because it built trust. It made me a person. I don't know. There's something about just being human. I think went so far, and I didn't know that going in. I feel bad for my first couple years of kiddos. I owe them apologies.
We all do.
We all owe Marty's first class an apology.
Yes. Anybody else before we call it a day? I want to thank all of you for sharing. I think it's important from time to time that teachers, whether you're a veteran or a new teacher or mid-career, share your stories.
Yeah.
Share your stories. We've all got stories to tell. They're all valuable. They all have something to teach someone else. And I think the more we can do things like this and the more often we can do it, the better everyone will be. So I really thank you for your time today.
Thank you,
And
Jeff.
yeah, and
thanks,
thank you
Jeff.
for listening. Again, this is the Homegrown Podcast, and will also be posted on our Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel. So look for us there and subscribe and get all the good stuff in addition to this this podcast. So again, thank you, and look for us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.